Howdy, folks. Today we're flying high because we're talking aviation photography right after this. Welcome to Camera Shake, where we bring you the insider scoop on all things photography and videography, giving you a unique opportunity to stay ahead of the curve. As always, I'm your host, Kirsten Nuts, and before we get started, I've got one thing to ask of you. Over 65% of our viewers on YouTube and listeners on audio are not actually subscribed to this channel. Come on, folks, let's change that. Just hit that subscribe button. It helps me get even more cool guests on the show. One click, that is all it takes. Thank you so much. Now, without further ado, let's welcome today's special guest, the master of the air, commercial portrait, fine art, and aviation photographer, Brett Schauf. Brett, how's it going?
Great. How are you doing today? Thank you for having me on.
It's an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Brett, I've been looking at your art literally forever. And then you appeared on a show on the Platypod YouTube channel with Larry Becker. And then sort of things fell into place because I remember listening to, what you were saying about, or what you were talking about your photography on Behind the Shot, and all of a sudden I thought, yeah, that's that guy that shoots these incredible planes. Unbelievable. So I am super happy to welcome you on the Camera Shake podcast, because aviation photography is not something we've talked about a whole lot on this show. So this, I bet, is going to be super interesting.
Well, thank you. Again, shout out to Larry and all the folks at Platypod for making the connection. I've had so much fun just working with their gear, and it's really some of the coolest, most accessible stuff around. So for camera support and small lighting support, it's unbeatable. But yeah, excited to be here. Excited to introduce myself to your audience and talk a little aviation photography.
So aviation photography is, as most viewers and listeners will understand, is photographing planes and helicopters and anything that flies on the ground and in the air.
So we do a lot of, there's a lot of different elements. The glory or the really cool stuff is like what you see over my shoulder when we're able to launch multiple planes and we're able to shoot an air-to-air photo shoot. The coordination that goes into that, and just the exhilaration, the thrill, and just the ability to capture some very, very unique images. That's the favorite part of it for sure. But there are some great opportunities to shoot, whether planes on the ground for marketing purposes or at an air show, anything like that. There's just a lot of opportunity to go out and enjoy the world of aviation and try to capture that unique shot.
How did you first get involved in aviation photography? How did you get from, because in your sort of day job, let's call it that, you run a commercial photography studio. So how did you make that jump from shooting commercial stuff to aviation?
Well, I was very blessed and very fortunate. My home base is Wichita, Kansas, where there is a large amount of general aviation production. And so it's a culture of aviation in this community. And so once I transitioned into the commercial and corporate world, it was very natural to pursue those as clients and to pursue the aviation industry. A lot of work and time went in, and you start at the bottom and you just kind of work your way up until you get the opportunities to go out and do some of the larger, more pronounced and well recognized photo shoots and some of the marketing shots. In the process of that, I was introduced to a not-for-profit organization that was restoring a B-29. Became involved with that organization, and now as part of a team member with that organization, I tour with them, and it certainly gives me a lot of access to shoot both that plane, other warbirds, and a lot of just different air show performers.
Because I guess air shows, that's a really easy form of access to, if people want to get into shooting planes, going to an air show just gives you at least some degree of access. I mean, I'm guessing at an air show, you're still relatively far away from the planes. Is that right?
It depends. A lot of air shows, you have access to get right up onto the planes and static displays. And in a lot of cases, you can go onto the planes and tour them on the ground. All air shows are different. And, depending on the performers there, you have, I guess, different access. But there are air shows you can go to and even ride on airplanes for revenue purposes. And of course, the big air shows are going to have one of the demonstration teams, which whether it be the Blue Angels or the Thunderbirds or any of the other demonstration teams, are just absolutely incredible and great opportunity.
See, one of the things I love about planes in general is not only the overall shape of them and seeing them in flight, but I really actually love all the details, all the little design details, like the propellers, turbines, whatever it is. To me, especially on older planes like the B-29 that you mentioned, it's sort of a step back in just general design, because a lot of the time stuff like that just doesn't get built like that anymore. And so it must be an absolute pleasure to have the opportunity to photograph that.
Oh, I said it's an honor to be able to do that. And again, to your point, you're stepping back 80 years. The B-29 that I tour with Doc just celebrated its 80th birthday last December. So you get on board and you feel, you can't help but look when you look at the engine and realize that was, designed with somebody at a drafting table and a pencil. The cables, the control surfaces, just the difference between what that is in the modern aircraft, but yet all the similarities too. But then you think about all the people and all the sacrifices that were made to bring that plane into its purpose and do what it was, designed to do. So the details on it are certainly very incredible. Just to look at all the, the wires and cables and, like you said, the big radial engines. It's a very humbling and unique experience.
That's, of course, that's the other thing, the history that comes with a plane like that, because that plane's been active in World War II, if I remember correctly. Is that right?
So the plane was built and flew during World War II. It did not see combat. It was its mission was a radar calibration plane. So while they did begin its military service in 1945, it did not see overseas combat.
How do you deal with planes of that size? That's the thing I always wonder. It's because as a subject, they're so ginormous. What is, especially sort of in if we start with the sort of the pre-production, the planning stage, how do you plan a shoot like that? It's like what's your starting point?
Well, if I will start with the air-to-air, because that's probably what most people are interested in, and that is, it's just really putting the logistics and the safety aspects together. So your first priority is to figure out, what the subject plane is, which would be the B-29 in this case, and then what's your platform plane. So, we have to go out and find a plane that can fly relative close performance window to the plane. And then it's a matter of just a lot of safety briefings and coordination and where you're going to shoot, what positions. And you're working in such a multi-dimensional world. It's not like shooting, like you mentioned, you shot cars. A car you pull up and you park, and then you can move it a little bit here or there. With an airplane in the air, now we have two moving parameters or two moving objects, shooting from one to another and dealing with the spatial. We're going to have to edit a lot of that out. I apologize.
That's totally cool.
Where's a good restart point?
Just start from the beginning of that question. What's your starting point in the planning process?
I think the starting point in the planning process is really we try to get down and come up with what we want to accomplish in the shoot, whether that be the plane over a specific area or the plane with another specific airplane. From there, it really becomes a lot of logistics where, when we can fly, where we're flying out of, time of day, what's the best light that we can be in, what's the best background we can shoot over. And then you bring in your platform plane and how that platform plane is going to work in relationship to what you're shooting as far as speed, performance, elevations, things like that. Then all the safety briefings begin, and the coordination of just really an air-to-air play. How do you position the subject plane where you want it in relation to the sun, the ground, and your camera?
But it sounds like a lot more planning than I was kind of aware of, really. I mean, do you have to go out on like a reconnaissance flight to start with to find like the backgrounds, or how do you go about that?
Very rarely do we have that luxury. Most of the people we're dealing with fly quite a bit. We're very familiar with the areas we're in, and so it's pretty easy to sit down, have a conversation with the pilots, and then say, okay, here's what we're wanting to capture, whether it be beach or mountains, or sometimes we don't really have as much input in the location as we would like. It's here's where we are. This is the time we're going to fly. What's the best area you have? Then it's just getting aviation maps and looking at where are the areas we can fly, and make sure there's no restricted areas that we need to avoid. And is there a lake? Is there some cool pastures? Is there some rolling terrain, just to give us that aspect and go from there?
I'm thinking that's going to be relatively difficult to pre-plan a number of those aspects. I mean, I'm thinking, in an ideal sense, you'd want the light to be just right, so then that has a major impact on timing. But then I guess you need to have there's going to be a flight plan and all the rest of it. I mean, it's a hell of a lot of work just to actually get to the point where you can start shooting.
It is. And there's a lot, again, there's a lot of coordination. There's, you have both flight crews involved and ground crews. And then of course you're going to communicate depending on where you're at with any other air traffic, and make sure you're just operating in a safe environment.
How far away from how far away from your subject are you actually? Like, when, let's say you're shooting a B-29, in actual distance, how far away are you from that plane?
It's with the B-29, it's a larger plane. So I typically try to get, 100, 150, 200 feet. Sometimes we'll bring it in a little closer if we're wanting to get like an up close cockpit shot or things like that. I use lenses. I like to use the focal length of the lens and create a little bit of space. My ideal shot is I work with the 24 to 120 or 70 to 200. Those are the two ideal lenses I want to take up in the air with me, and work within those ranges. I don't need a performance team flight where, we have 3 feet of wing separation, because I'm not able to capture, the plane in its essence. So we'll typically operate anywhere from 80 to 200 feet separation, depending on the maneuvers, depending on if we're in a turn, and just different things like that.
And I'm guessing because you're you're in 3-dimensional space, and you're moving things around. Well, there's two objects moving at the same time. I guess it's all down to communication. How do you communicate with your pilot at all times when you're shooting?
Yeah, absolutely. We're communicated in, so I have a headset on. I can communicate, and almost always I'll be communicating with our flight crew. So typically we'll have a pilot that's flying the plane, and then I'll have a co-pilot that is running the communications on the plane. And so I will communicate with him if I want the subject plane to be 10 foot closer, or 20 foot back, or up or down, in or out. And we've developed terminology that we briefed before the shoot that, we usually work with a 5, 10, 20 rule, which isn't necessarily feet per se, but, 5 means, hey, move a little bit, 10 means move a little more, and 20 moves, pretty significant adjustment. And then it's just, again, do you want them to move, closer, forward, back, up, down, or in or out? And so, you're really working on a 6-axis control of trying to position that plane.
So you're positioning yourself in relation to the plane, rather than communicating with, let's say, the B-29 to get them to move, or is it a matter of both?
Yeah, and there's always variations, but typically the platform plane is a lead plane, and it makes minor adjustments. So it will set a course and heading, and we'll have the subject plane fly off of us. So we'll make any adjustments to the subject plane, because the subject plane is the one where the pilot can see us and know exactly where they can go, versus the platform plane, the plane I'm on. Most of the time, the pilot can't see behind and see what's going on. So any changes in formation or distance or adjustments we usually have are made through the subject plane that we're shooting. So we'll adjust them closer or further, up or down.
The one thing that that I always want, because when I fly and I like to take some pictures from the plane, one thing that hampers me all the time is the fact that I don't really get great angles because I'm looking through like a really small window. When you shoot these planes, are you like hanging out of the side of the plane, or like what is the setup there? So I want to.
Yeah, again, it depends on the platform plane. The most common platform plane is just like a twin engine Beechcraft plane where you take the two side doors off and you have maybe a 4 foot by 5 foot rectangle that you're shooting out of. Of course, you're tethered in. The limiting factor in that scenario is you can only shoot out of one side of the airplane. So you have to plan accordingly for light and positioning and things like that. Occasionally, you're lucky and you're able to shoot out of a plane that maybe has a back ramp that will be able to, you can lower the ramp and have a big shooting window out the loading map. So, and then there are a couple platform planes out there that have special camera ports built in the floors, or windows on either side that have openings that you're able to shoot with. So, again, it's just, you have to take into consideration what you're shooting from and what availability you're going to have and what the limitations are going to be with the equipment that you had.
Wow, I mean, it sounds amazing. How worried are you that you're dropping your gear out of the window?
That's a bad day. I tether everything in, so it couldn't reach the ground. The FAA frowns on things falling out of airplanes, and there's usually paperwork involved, and it's just not something you want to do. But typically we've got harness systems. Anything that's loose, whether camera bags or camera gear, is fastened and secured to something in the plane. So you mitigate anything like that. Just a lot of checklists and pre-flight planning goes into making sure that okay, if I'm going to have two cameras, how am I securing both cameras into a tether system so that I can smoothly transition from one to another, and not, like you said, not let anything get loose.
Have you ever dropped anything out of the plane?
Nope. Absolutely. No.
I mean, it's incredible, really. I'm thinking, do you have like a set shot list that you've pre-planned, or how exact can you be with that? Under those, because I'm just thinking everything's moving, so it's like, how exact can it be?
So if I'm doing a commercial shoot, so if I'm working for a manufacturer, we have some very specific shot lists that we want, whether it be a single plane or if we're flying a formation or a family of planes. So we will have very specific angles that we'll want, very broad terms. We may want a nose on, we may want, a hero shot looking up, we may want a hero shot looking down, may want some quartering, we'll want, in turns. So in that scenario, we will have worked with the marketing team and have, several hours worth of planning processes of, okay, here's the shots we want. And then we'll go into pre-flight briefings with the pilots and make sure everybody understood, okay, we want to be able to get maybe it's a touch and go or simulated touch and go. So how do we position our platform plane? How do we position the subject plane so that we get it just coming over the runway and are able to get that timing just right? Or we may have multiple planes we want put into a formation. So again, we brief with pilots, and we'll work with a lot of models, airplane models in the briefing of, how do we stage? What's it going to look like from the camera's perspective? And so, there's absolutely a ton of requested or a shot list that you're working with. and we'll whiteboard it out, and we'll have samples and then everything like that. So we've got a very clear plan and idea of what we want to go up there. And then hopefully we're able to coordinate that or choreography that to make it happen. Now, when we fly, there are other times when it's maybe not quite as choreographed as a shot list. We know we're going to go do a formation flight, and we're going to base a lot of it on when we can be up in the air, what the light's like, and what the conditions are, and you'll kind of make the adjustments on the fly and adjust that way.
Hey, let me just jump in real quick to tell you about the amazing sponsor of this episode, Platypod. Platypod offers innovative camera support systems designed to unleash your creativity. With their stable, versatile, and portable solutions, you can capture stunning shots like never before. And I'm not just saying that. As the host of the Camera Shake podcast, I can personally vouch for Platypod's incredible products. They've become an integral part of the show. In fact, I'm surrounded by various Platypod products holding up lights, cameras, microphones, and so on. It's really helped to transform the way I make the show and the way I shoot at home, in the studio, and on location. But don't just take my word for it. Explore Platypod's website at www.platypod.com to discover their range of products, including the Platypod Extreme, Platypod tripod heads, and the brand new handle, of course. Make sure to follow Platypod on Instagram and Facebook at Platypod Tripods for exclusive updates, tips, and giveaways. By choosing Platypod, you're not only investing in your photography, but you're also supporting the Camera Shake Photography Podcast. Thanks again to Platypod, our amazing sponsor. Platypod, where innovation never sleeps. What I find really quite amazing is in a lot of your shots, you can see, you've got these amazing Kansas sunsets going on. And I'm wondering, really, that doesn't give you a lot of time to shoot that plane. I mean, realistically, an hour, maybe, or something like that. So, I mean, how long is a shoot like that typically?
Rarely are we in the air more than an hour. That's a pretty long time to be up in the air in formation like that. If we're dealing with multiple planes, and of course we will do that, but your sunlight and sunset hours, your really golden time to shoot is about an hour as the sun kind of settles down. And we do a lot of it at sunrise too, where if the planes are capable to fly in the dark, we will take off pre-sun up and join up. And I've even done some where we strobe, we'll throw strobes of the subject plane to kind of light it up over a cityscape or something like that, just to create a little more of a unique look.
Yeah, because that was going to be my next question. I mean, obviously we'll talk about how you light a plane when it's in situ on the ground. But in the air, your options are obviously limited. So how do you deal with that? And especially with, a plane like the B-29 that is essentially shiny, like a mirror. How do you deal with that, just purely from a lighting perspective? Or is there a lot of work that has to go into it in post-production, let's say in Photoshop?
Yes. So there usually is a lot of post-production work. But I will say I've never tried to strobe the B-29. The B-29 with its classifications and restrictions, we just don't fly it at night. We certainly wouldn't do a formation flight outside of very strict visual flight regulations. So that's just not a scenario that we really deal with that airplane. So from a lighting standpoint, you're really just positioning it in the sun and just trying to use that natural light. And if you get lucky and maybe get a few high clouds and you get some diffusion, then it makes life a little easier. But with a solid aluminum frame and things like that, there's always going to be a few hot spots, or you're always trying to expose for the highlights as much as you can to not blow things out. But it's just finding that balance. I think we're very lucky today to have the latitude and on the cameras that we're using. That there's pretty good latitude of exposure that you can capture with today's camera, and without blowing highlights out, still be able to come in and cover a lot of the shadow and dark details.
Let's talk about gear a little bit, because I know people will be interested in that. You mentioned like a 24 to 120 lens. What is the kind of gear, your standard gear that you would take up in the air to shoot a plane in the air?
Currently, my setup is a Nikon based. I use the Z9 and the Z7 IIs, a lot of those. And, actually, I'll usually have a 70 to 200. I'll usually have a 24 to 120. I'm really not worried about wide open apertures. So, my 24 to 120 is an f4. The 70 to 200, of course, is a 2.8. But, so much of the time we're shooting pretty stop down, just especially with the prop plane. You're wanting to drag that shutter speed. You're wanting to see that motion, not just a stagnant frozen prop plane in the air. So typical gear though would be like a Nikon Z9, a Nikon Z7 II or Z8. And then I like to use stabilization. So if I have a Kenyan gyro that when possible, I'll mount one of the camera systems to that. And just to give you that extra degree of stabilization when you start working down shutter speeds into the 50th or 60th of a second range.
Oh, wow. What is that? Is that like, that's sort of a tripod, like a stabilized tripod head type of thing? Is that what it is?
It's a gyro. It looked like a small football that has a gyro in it that basically creates a gravitational field or simulated gravitational field. I'm probably butchering that all up, but they're pretty unique. Pretty unique, and when you shot film, they were very, very necessary. Today's in-camera stabilizations and lens stabilizations certainly give you a lot more latitude to not need something like that, but it's still nice to have that just extra platform to shoot with.
I mean, yeah, that's something I didn't even think about, is the fact that you're really, there's a lot of vibration going on, there's a lot of movement, and you're going to have to stabilize your camera. I mean, what interests me really is you mentioned some really low shutter speeds. I mean, I'm thinking, and I can understand why, because I guess especially with propeller machines, you do want to get that nice blurry, propeller. But then you're talking about shutter speeds, I would guess, it's like you mentioned, like a 50th of a second. But then you'd also introduce motion blur because you're moving and the other plane's moving. How do you compensate for all of that? Like, I mean, so then you get a sharp plane, with like nice propeller blur. It's like, how the heck?
There's a lot of culling involved, and you shoot burst mode,
Right.
and it's far from an exact science, but your hits are not as high of a rate as what you would shoot in a normal environment. So there are a lot of images that get cold and thrown away because they're just soft and not as sharp as you would like. And again, depending on the size of the props and how many blades and what the RPM is, you can get up to, on a small 4-blade prop, you can shoot 160 of a second and still get a great arc. So you're just kind of balancing all that out. And it's just a lot of, it's not unlike shooting a car where you're panning. You're just trying to maintain that steady flow and that steady motion of the camera to match the motion of the subject.
And it does take quite a lot of practice. I remember, especially during the pandemic, I used to go to some racetracks and in the area and shoot cars racing. And it's the panning thing. When you get it down, it's amazing, but it does take a little bit of practice for sure. Do you find that with the Z9 you get a higher hit rate? Because I'm asking you that because I just very recently bought a Z8, and I find that with the stuff that I shoot, the hit rate is incredible, absolutely unbelievable. I shoot a lot of boxing and things, and so there's fast movement involved. And I've gotten to the point where my hit rate is so high that I'm now I feel like I'm totally overshooting. Like I'm just it's. Like I'm still culling like crazy, but it was like all the images I'm culling, I actually tack sharp, and I'm like, okay, I need to not be so trigger happy.
Yeah, the Z9 is an incredible camera. It's one of my favorite cameras I've probably ever shot with, and yeah, just between its focusing system and its internal stabilization, and then the new Z lenses now, it does. Our hit rates are so much higher than they were when we were shooting some of the traditional DSLRs. And so, yeah, you do wind up, going up and of course the Z9 is a fairly fast shutter. So you can run off a lot of exposures in a short amount of time. and you can create an awful amount of work when you get back on the ground. A lot of times the culling process is kind of an exciting process too. It gives you a chance to relive, and it's certainly a learning process. And you're going to say, "Now, I wish I'd have done that different," or "Hey, next time we go up," and which kind of leads to a lot of the debriefing and things like that. So, but now the Z9 and the modern mirrorless cameras in general. I know I've talked to a lot of photographers in this industry that shoot other brands, and just across the board, the equipment that we have to work with today is absolutely incredible.
Yeah, I remember when I first got the Z8, only like a few weeks ago. I tried out the 120 frames per second burst mode thing, and it was like literally, it's like, hey, check this out. Whoa, unbelievable.
Yeah.
Only JPEG, but it's incredible. I mean, in my case, shooting boxing, I need to deliver very specific images, and I don't actually need to deliver too many of those. I just need to be very specific images because they're there to sell, essentially. So if I shoot 1,000 images and I get per event and I get all the shots that I need, then that's perfectly fine. But with these cameras, I tend to come away with multiples of those, like multiple thousand shots, and it's like, oh God, now I've got to spend 4 hours culling. That's the downside, because they're like literally. It used to be so easy. When I used to shoot this with the D750, by the way, it was easy because like only every 6 shot or something was in focus. It's like, hey, wait, there's one, perfect. Now it's like, oh, I don't even know. They're all great. So okay, so we're talking cameras, we're talking lenses, and the stabilization thing. Do you find that using a gyro and using the electronic stabilization in the camera, do they sort of conflict with each other? Because that's something I found with using that on a gimbal, that there seems to be some weird warping going on sometimes.
Oh yeah, you can get some very interesting. Yeah, for warping, I guess is what it is when this is a fight. Typically, if I'm using a gyro, I turn the lens stabilization off. Just you shoot it like you would if you're shooting off of a tripod. In-body stabilization works pretty well, even with the gyro. But the lens stabilization is where I've found will conflict with it every once in a while and give you some just really very unique images. That part of it.
I'll find out a video. I remember, what was it? I think it was the Z6 too. I think a couple of years ago, I shot it for the first time. It was like one of these things. I just recently got it. I went to shoot some video at the photography show in Birmingham at the time, and I had the camera on a gimbal. And when I didn't really notice it on the back of the camera, but when I was watching the footage back, it's like, okay, so the eye autofocus works really well. It's logging onto the face, but there's very bizarre warping going on in the background. It's like, what the heck is that? And it took me a minute to figure out what that was. And of course, I had all the stabilization on. It was like, give me more stabilization. I'll turn it all on. Lens, body, gimbal, and the results. Yeah, and of course, what I was thinking was like, oh, clearly more stabilization must be better than less. So let's take it all. But yeah, it turned out it had some very strange effects. So let's talk about photographing planes on the ground, because some of the most striking images I find are, these amazing shots of planes in situ with, the sunset in the background. There's a number of your shots that are absolutely phenomenal. How do you approach that? Do you light that, or is it natural light? Like how do you go about a shoot like that?
A lot of times I will bring in lights, and that's where we'll throw another plug out platypod. The lit platypods make great light stands, especially for small mono heads and things like that. But yeah, you're able to, we'll just set up anywhere from again, every shoot is different. So it depends on the size of the plane and the angle of the light and what type of day and what type of natural lighting you're working with. But it's not uncommon to have anywhere from 2 to 5 lights strobing on an airplane. And then it just becomes that that balancing act of building in the ambient light with the strobe and using the strobes to accent certain elements of the light, and just trying to create that dynamic image.
So one of the things I remember I was experimenting with in the very beginning when I first started shooting cars during the pandemic was really, how to modify the light. And I tried loads of different things. I tried huge softboxes, for example, to shoot cars. Because in principle, there are certain similarities, as in like you have highly reflective surfaces with curvatures in them and all the rest of it. And so I tried everything from like literally bare bulb, to like 7-inch, 9-inch reflectors to big soft boxes. How do you go about it? Do you modify the light at all, or is it are you basically just hammering out the light straight from the strobe, or how do you do it?
Yeah, a lot of times they're just bare bulb strobes, or if I need something very focused, I'll bring a grid in or something like that. But usually, I just don't have enough people and enough hands to use modification. So many times there's so many elements with wind and things like that. You're not able to take. It's just not practical to have large modifiers out. And I can remember one instance I was shooting a larger airplane, and really needed to diffuse the light, and so we ended up just using the big hangar doors and just blasting all the strobe lights I could find into this big white hangar door, bouncing it back into the airplane, and it created a great big softbox and worked out really well. But typically the environment we're working in, we're trying to just feather the lights, just trying to create diffusion just through feathering, and working with it there. And there are times you have to go into post and clean up hot spots, and you try to be as aware of that as possible, and go from there.
Because again, when you're shooting highly reflective surfaces, there's only so much control you can have over those. And what you mentioned the wind. I learned that the hard way, back in the day, because the amount of times that I had like, scrims fly away, or like I remember we shot, what was it? I think it was like a Toyota RAV4 or something. I said, and we had a 6-foot a 6-foot octobox that we used for that, which in itself is a beast to actually just carry around. But then have that on a big light stand, so you can extend it, over the actual car. Any little bit of wind will just basically rip that thing straight out of somebody's hands. It turns into a sail essentially.
Yeah, well, you're working with cars and airplanes. The fastest way to ruin your day is to have something blow over and damage what you're shooting with. I have gone to the approach where I use a lot of small mono heads. I use, stabilization. A lot of my lighting is from the ground up. So, the Platypod system works great for that, just to have those low angle hero style lights. And then when we do bring in light stands, a lot of sandbags, a lot of distance. So, if something blows over, it's going to destroy the light, but it's not going to hit any of the planes or anything like that. But it does create a little bit more on the back end, not being able to offer that beautiful, gorgeous, diffused light. But if I'm shooting outside, that's not a chance I'm willing to take. And I'll spend a little bit of time in post, just to have that safety issue. Now, working in a hangar, if we're working in a hangar and we have a little bit more control, then we'll bring in, bigger strobe heads, and we'll bring in modification and soft boxes and diffusion material, and it creates a much different shoot that way. But so much of what I do right now is outside, and we're trying to capture that environment and that sunset. Just makes more sense to work with the small strobe heads.
Because that's another thing. I mean, because I remember thinking, well, maybe it might be an idea to actually just shoot, during overcast skies, which here in the UK is not a problem because, it's overcast all the time. So, probably not that much of an option here. Because then you would get a lot, more evenness in the light, and you wouldn't have to necessarily deal with that many hotspots. But of course, you wouldn't get these dramatic sunsets or sunrises.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, certainly, if you have an overcast day, you take it for what it is, and then you be thankful, and you work with what's given to you. But sometimes just that perfectly flat light. An airplane sometimes has a personality, and you want to have a little bit of that definition, a little bit of that shape, and you want some shadow contrast, and you want to be able to sculpt it. That's like you would a portrait. So yes, if it's an overcast day and we have that ability, then that's wonderful. We did a shoot with a P-51 Mustang Swamp Fox, and we actually did the shoot right at the peak of the eclipse. So where we were at, we had a little more than an 80% eclipse. And so we had some high clouds, we had the eclipse, we had some just incredibly diffused lighting, which meant that, anytime we placed a strobe, we were creating some highlights, and we were really able to sculpt and kind of shape that plane and highlight the features that we wanted to on it. So, in an outdoor environment, you really take what's given to you and try to work with that and modify it from there with the lights that you have.
I like what you said about platypus earlier, because people tend to forget that very often, because a lot of the time people think, oh, okay, the platypods are, especially the Platypod Extreme, for example, it's a camera platform, but it's not. It's really just a platform for just about anything you can bolt onto that thing, lights, microphones, whatever it is. And although, this isn't a Platypod commercial, but this episode is, or this podcast is, sponsored by Platypod, so I'm saying that. And one of the things that I explain to people very often is that actually, I use Platypod stuff all around me all of the time. There's a hair light that you can't see out of shot, which is basically clamped to a shelf with a Platypod Ultra and, a gooseneck and so forth. And so, like, these things are everywhere, like they're holding up microphones and lights. And that's the thing about these tools, is it's like a Swiss Army knife in photography, in my view.
It really is. And again, not to make it too much of a commercial, but I'm sitting here talking into a microphone that's being supported by the Platypod Extreme and the elbows, because that makes the most convenient, accessible, portable microphone stand that I have in the studio. But even just when we're shooting airplanes outdoors and you're using strobes, so much of what you're still doing is bracketing and involves shooting a plate shot with no strobes at all. And then, you may have 2 to 3 shots with, lights firing from different angles at different power. And so just having that stability in your camera, that, of course, I use the Platypod tripod heads. And, if I'm shooting from the ground, I'm going to use the Platypod Extreme or, things like that. It just makes life a lot easier when you go in and know that camera hasn't moved, and you're able to take 3, 4, 5 shots and stitch in as you need to do. So, plus it's just the ease of moving around with that. I can throw a couple of the Platypod bases into a camera bag or a Pelican case, and it's just so quick and easy to set up. And especially if I'm at an air show and not able to carry around light stands and things like that, it gives me that great flexibility.
So I remember shooting a Ferrari during the pandemic. And it was a similar scenario. It was a low angle shot, that kind of hero shot. But of course, that was before I even knew platypods existed. And I remember using a Manfrotto tripod that allows you to get really close to the ground. But boy, is that a kerfuffle. Oh my God, that takes like 10 minutes just to set a thing up. And it's big, it's cumbersome. It's way too complicated. It's more complicated than it has to be. But with the Platypod Extreme, you even have your spikes that you could just jam into the ground for some extra stability. Brilliant.
Now, I was fortunate enough. We did some hiking out in Montana earlier this year, and just to go up, and I did not want to carry tripods. It was a light day trip, and just being able to throw the Extreme and then the handle. You get up and you find a waterfall or something like that. You have that right there. It's quick. It's simple. You set it up real quick. You're able to get the shot, and you're not carrying a tripod all day. And even the small carbon fibers are banging on trees and rocks and things. So it's just a convenience, and it's a great system.
Yeah, I mean, it's convenience, but it sort of forces you to not fall into that eye level trap. That's how I always think of it, because the minute you carry a tripod with you, you're going to set it up. It's going to be more or less give or take eye level, and so every shot you take is sort of taken from the same perspective. Whilst with a tool like a Platypod or similar products may be available, it just forces you to actually think differently, and that's the thing that always attracts me to stuff like that. Is it just forces me to get a different perspective as a photographer, and that can only have a positive impact on your photography in the end.
Yeah, I always try to, and even before I started using the Platypods or even knew about them, I was the guy that was laying flat on the ground trying to get that low angle shot. And, it just, the dynamics of it, the most common view, is a street photographer that walks around with a 50 millimeter lens, shooting everything at eye level. There's a different perspective I want to capture when I'm shooting an airplane. I want to do, whether it's shooting it down or shooting it in the air or shooting it from the ground up, creating low angles. It's just that difference in an angle that's going to cause people to take that second look, and that's what we're trying to get.
And changing the angle is so important. And I've talked about this millions of times on this podcast, but I like to go out and do a little bit of street photography now and again. And I've recently started shooting on an old Mamiya C330, which has basically a top-down viewfinder, but it basically forces me to literally shoot from hip level, and it's made a big difference in the images that I'm producing. Just that, I mean, you just cannot, with that particular viewfinder, you can switch the viewfinders out. There's different attachments that you can use, but with this particular viewfinder, there's just no way that you can shoot at eye level, So it forces you again to just take a step back and actually get a slightly different perspective. And again, I'm loving it.
Yeah, well, back to the modern cameras, or the newer generations of cameras, the articulating windows that we're able to shoot out of. I find myself bringing the camera up to my eyes so much more infrequently now than I used to. And you're able to use that articulating window to maybe shoot camera from above your head, to get that angle, and folding it out, flipping it out, and shooting from waist level. It just makes it so much more easy and convenient to do that on the fly. So.
Yeah, that's what I love about gimbals as well nowadays. A gimbal plus an articulating screen just allows you to do these like low level, push-ins or pull-outs, and these rises. It's super easy to get these camera moves nowadays. When I remember, it wasn't that long ago when, the days before in-body stabilization, for example, or even, the old-fashioned Steadicams, it was basically a pull. They wouldn't allow you to get that low, actually, in the end. It was so much more limiting. So nowadays we have all of these different tools and abilities to create images and moving images that are a lot more, a lot more film-like in many ways. That's how I look at it. So it's much more like, it has a movie character. And of course, they used to have massive cranes and whatever to do all that, and we can do that quite easily. I want to talk to you about the post-production or the editing process. I've been told off, by the way, by none other than Pete Sousa for calling it editing. So I've got to be careful what I say. So the post-production, Pete, if you're watching this, I've remembered what you said. So anyway, so the post-production process. You mentioned bracketing. It's actually, again, it's something I didn't actually consider, but it makes perfect sense. What's your sort of standard process when it comes to post-production? Let's say you've shot images, you're loading them up on a computer. What are your sort of go-to steps to make these images look as amazing as they do?
Well, once everything is cold, I really try to start with the highest quality image I can, because the fix it and post mentality is a time killer. That being said, there is a lot of time spent in post, and air to air, is more just a light calibration, just light and dodge and burn, fixing highlights and things like that. But when you get into some of the higher end marketing shots, there is, you may need to do some bracketing, or you may need to spend more time, just bringing in different levels and things like that. Typical workflow for me is to get all of the white balance and basic exposure work done in Lightroom, and then the heavier lifting is done in Photoshop. And of course, there are some amazing plugins out there through On1 and Topaz that, especially on the air-to-air, if you do need to add just a touch of sharpening or some special effects or things like that, the Topaz AI Sharpen is absolutely amazing. Of course, when you're working with low light and you want to come in and you want to do some denoise, they're tools for creating an image that was shot at much higher ISO than was possible several years ago. You're now able to come in and just make that a very usable, sellable image. So, yeah.
How do you deal with highlights, especially on planes? I think, because I'm just sort of referring back to my experience with cars, and I remember spending a lot of time evening out, highlight lines along the side of the car, for example, just to make sure they're straight, not too interrupted. Do you go down to that level, or do you leave that more natural?
I like the natural, and to a certain point there are highlights. You've got to have the highlights, and you got to have the shadows, just create the definition in the plane. I don't want to take an image and just create such a flat, almost perfect surface that it's obviously been over manipulated. But it's it is a balancing act, and the end use of the image has a play on how much of that you're going to spend time doing as well.
One of the,
I don't know the straight answer to that.
Yeah, I mean, it just depends. And you're right. It depends on the intended outcome. I guess it depends on the intent. That's the thing that I always preach is like, it depends on what you're shooting it for. That will determine how much detail I'll put into the post-production. It's the same with the portrait. Is it going to be? I mean, think headshots, right? Like, is it going to be 120 by 120 pixel email signature image? I'm definitely not going to go all out fully retouching that compared to something that's going to end up on the side of a bus. So it's horses for courses, as they say over here. The thing that I remember that used to annoy the heck out of me when I used to retouch cars was reflections. I tell you what, the biggest mistake I ever made was, at the time, I don't know why I thought this was a good idea, but I had this thing where I thought like, oh, I want to shoot cars, but I want to get in some, juxtaposition. So I want to take like a high-end sports car, like a Ferrari. I had access to a Ferrari, and I used to shoot that car regularly. But I want to put that into a scene that's very unusual for this car. So I want to just create that dissonance, basically, because you can shoot that car in front of an expensive hotel entrance, or in front of like a skyscraper, in front of a luxury kind of building, and it makes perfect sense. But if you shoot that in an environment that is not its usual environment, then maybe it might make you think a little bit more about the image, or figure out what's going on. That was the idea. Generally, I don't think necessarily a bad idea, but what I did was I shot this Ferrari. I took this in the forest, and we drove this car into a forest, and then literally pushed it into the thicket. First of all, we got caught by the forest ranger. That was a funny thing. It's like, this forest ranger shoots. They would like you with lights and it's like, assistance and everything. And this forest ranger shows up. He goes like, "Oh, do you have do you have permission to shoot here?" I'm like, "Oh, no, this was because we thought it's public land. We didn't realize we had to get permission." It's like, "Well, you do. And did you see those barriers over there?" I'm like, "Yeah." It's like, "Well, they clearly mean you shouldn't be there in the first place." Like, "Oh no." And then he goes like, "But this is a really cool car. What car is this?" And then you got into the conversation. He was actually fine with it. But I'm saying is, That was the biggest mistake because the amount of reflections I had to retouch out just from the foliage in the trees and the light coming through, it was horrendous. It was horrible, actually. It's just an absolute nightmare. Um, I've had brick walls reflected in the surface of the car, which is again not a pretty pattern, to retouch out. How do you deal with that? Is that like a major part of taming reflections?
It is, especially on a reflective airplane like that. But there's a limit of what you can do. You obviously pay attention to where you're at, and you pay attention to where your lights and light stands, and when there are reflections, you try to shoot them in a way that they fall in an area of a plane that's easily retouchable. In other words, if you have to go in and rebuild rivets, or if it's on a particular curvature or where the wing and that fuselage meet, makes it very difficult to go in and do that retouch, versus if it's on a flat surface that you can clone stamp or content fill or whatever. So, it's, I know sometimes we'll try polarizing filters just to try to knock down as much of that reflection as we can when we're shooting it. At the end of the day, there are things. I mean, it's an aluminum airplane, or it's a high polished car. It's reflective. That's the natural perspective of that image is that there is going to be some reflection, and
I'm always amazed, especially when it comes to very, very highly reflective sort of supercars or something. I'm always amazed when I see Tim Wallace's work. His cars are pristine. I don't know how the heck he does it. It's absolutely perfect. I'm always thinking, how? But then when I see some behind the scenes, I mean, I've spoken to him before, and when I see some behind the scenes stuff, I'm like, oh, okay, well, right, okay, this is a huge studio with huge scrims and so it's probably a lot easier to do that than having a plane on a runway, and trying to pull it off. I'm really interested in the plane that we've been talking about, the B-29. Doc, tell me a little bit about that plane and about that project in general.
So the B-29, the history of the B-29 is it was developed during World War II. At the beginning of World War II, there was not a plane in existence that gave it the capability to operate a Pacific theater for the ranges that they were flying. So the plane was developed during World War II. Its main purpose was to be used in the Pacific theater, something that could be flown the great distances. It was the first pressurized airplane, so it was able to fly at altitudes. Previously, you didn't operate at with a larger capacity. So it was a very groundbreaking airplane at the time. And of course, as the war went on, history shows it was the plane that dropped the atomic weapons and basically brought an end to the war. So that was the purpose and mission of the B-29 specifically. After the war, of course, they were all retired because the jet age, the propeller planes just didn't have a role in the environment that they were in. So the planes most of them were sent to the desert. This specific plane was sent to the desert. It was used as a target, sat on a target range. And eventually it was recognized that there just are no more of these. Currently, there's 2 flying. Probably will never be more than that left airworthy. So the plane was rescued out of the desert. It was brought into Wichita in the year 2000 on 7 flatbed trailers. We have an amazing volunteer team who, at that point, started the restoration process. Wound up being a 16-year restoration process. The plane flew for the first time in 2016. I got involved with the airplane in 2015, right as they were getting ready to roll it out and do some first flights and things like that. Just kind of became a passion project and started traveling with the crew and embedded myself into the team and as one of the volunteers, and have just spent the time just trying to honor those veterans and like I say, the women that built them and the men that flew them, and honor all the volunteers that dedicated so much to getting that plane restored, and then of course trying to educate the next generations is the significance of what that was and the impact it had on society. So that's
How long
kind of
did it take?
the next version of.
How long did it take to restore that plane?
It was 16 years. Well, a little over 16 years. So after it was brought out of the desert, it took several years for it to be disassembled and put on flatbed trailers. But once we got it into Wichita, it was a 16-year restoration from the time it arrived in Wichita to the time it first flew.
Wow. I mean, and so is it operating on a daily basis now as a sort of museum piece? I would put.
Well, it is a flying museum piece. So from about late March, early April through October or into early November, we will tour the airplane around the country. We'll do various air shows or tour stops. It just give people the access to walk in. You can, when we're doing a tour, you have the ability to walk in and walk through the plane and see it and experience it that way. Where the air shows will be static on the ground for people to view it and come to visit us. And then we also offer ride flights. We have a living history exemption so that we are able to do revenue rides for people who want to experience, maybe what their great grandfather or grandfather or great uncle or may have experienced. So, but yeah, it's a traveling museum. We tour 5-6 months out of the year and just to various airports and air shows.
What's it like flying on a plane like that?
It's a wonderful experience. It's a little bit hard to describe, but it kind of inspires awe because you can't help but be in that plane and sit and think about what the mission was and think about the 18 to 23, 24-year-old kids who were flying that in combat at night, the sacrifices they made. So you just put it in perspective, you get in there and you just think about, the amazing efforts and sacrifices that generation made.
There's a really great TV series on Apple TV called Masters of the Air, which I don't know if you've seen it, but basically one of my hedgehog clients is one of the actors in that show. That was shot literally around the corner from where I am. So this part of West London is basically where all the film studios are. So in a sense, it's like the British equivalent to Hollywood in a way. And a lot of the town scenes are shot in like small towns around the area around here. But that show is phenomenal because it really gives you a really good sense of what that was like for the crews at that time when they were flying all the bombing runs over Germany, out of the UK. And that was the thing. Is I remember watching that. It's one of these shows where you just can't stop. You have to binge watch the whole thing, or I had to, because it's so good. But again, it's just this whole thing. These planes were so amazing, and of course, that gets shot up. Then they return, they fix them up again. They put a bit of a plaster on it and send them out again, and and that went on for a relatively long time. So yeah, it must be quite an incredible feeling to fly in a machine like that.
Yeah, it really is. And, it's impossible not to be humbled when you're put in that position to sit up there and then realize the sacrifices that were made, just the purpose of that plane and the role that it served, and all the heroes that served during that time to make sure we were able to keep our freedoms. So, yeah, it's I don't know how else to put it other than it's just a very humbling experience, and just it's a great honor to get to do.
How often do you get a chance to fly that plane?
I'm pretty fortunate. I go most tour stops with it, so about 90-95% of the time the plane is traveling, I'll be with it. Of course, I'll fly with that plane. Any type of transition flights we do or anything like that. So I spend quite a few hours on that plane each year. just doing the volunteer work and the tour stops.
So, Brett, as we're recording this, is the very beginning of 2025. What are your plans for this year coming up?
I really want to grow just some different areas of the photography world. I love the aviation. There's some things I want to accomplish within that world. But really just kind of continue to grow on that basis. I'm looking forward to going out on tour again. We'll start probably early April. We'll go through March. Follow us on b29doc.com. That's the best way to get an idea of where that plane's going to be specifically. But then from a personal, I can only get back and shooting some more landscapes, work on some more artwork, and develop kind of just refine or develop the fine art portfolio. Hopefully get an opportunity to maybe do a little bit of teaching and certainly interact with other great photographers like yourself and do more events like this.
And this is the thing we haven't mentioned, but of course, I'm saying this, all the links to your website, everything, you're going to find that in the description. And no matter whether you're watching this on YouTube or listening to the audio version of this podcast, just check out the description. All the website details and everything else could be in there, because your website is phenomenal. The landscape photography on it is breathtaking as well. And of course, it is so Kansas, let's put it this way. It's stunningly beautiful. And of course, that is always like a conversation for a whole different show. The thing that struck me about your landscape photography is, so I have family in Alberta and in Canada, and Alberta is usually known as a very mountainous state because you get the Rockies, and massive mountains and everything. But if you go to southern Alberta, it's like south of Calgary, it's actually flatty McFlatterson. It's flatlands, and the landscape very much reminds me, until you get to Drumheller, where the landscape changes very bizarrely. But some of the landscape very much reminds me of the landscapes of Kansas that you've managed to capture in your photography. Is very not dissimilar at all.
No, it's a lot of people critique it and refer to it as a flyover state, but get down and experience there's a lot of terrain. We do have some flint hills with wildlife, amazing sunsets, and it's really just opening your eyes, creating perspective. Photography is about capturing the environment that you're in and trying to do that and using the light what's given. So I feel fortunate to be here. I feel fortunate to be from here, and certainly been very blessed in some of the opportunities we've had to capture some of the landscapes and just even some of the people and wildlife and things like that we have around here.
It's one of the best pieces of advice I ever got in terms of landscape photography. And everybody listening to this podcast will know, because I've said a million times. In fact, anybody who knows me will know this. I'm a terrible landscape photographer, absolutely hopeless. But one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was some advice that Dave Williams gave me when we were talking about travel photography, And I remember thinking at the time, like, well, but what if you don't live in an amazing environment? Like, I could say like, well, where I live, I don't see anything particularly exciting about this. Of course, this might be different for somebody who's not from here. That's the thing. So, I used to think like, well, but, what if I don't live, I don't know, in the Lofoten Islands or in Iceland or in in some of these amazing landscapes, then there's not very much to do. Then he said, well, actually, your job especially as a travel photographer, is to make that landscape look like you want to be there, and I'm thinking, that's a completely different angle, because actually, if I go out to the fields around my house at 5 o'clock in the morning and wait for the sun to come up, I'm pretty sure to get some really cool images, especially when the fog's rising and whatever, as it regularly does over here in England. So, I bet I can get some interesting images, and there's a lot of truth in that. Brett, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much for talking to us about aviation photography. I have a feeling we're going to be talking about landscape photography next.
I hope so. We're going to plan some trips and try to build on that travel portfolio as well. But it's an honor. I certainly appreciate the opportunity to come in and speak with you and your audience. And hope everybody listening and yourself has an incredible new year.
All right, folks, that's a wrap for today's episode. It was awesome having Brett on the show. But before we go, let me just recommend another episode that I think you like. Check out episode 215 with Gavin Hoey. I'm sure you love it. And if you enjoy this content, consider supporting us on buymeacoffee.com/camerashake to help us keep bringing you amazing episodes. I really don't know why I keep saying us, it's really just me. So anyhow, it really does mean the world to me. And for those of you listening on audio, did you know that there's a video version of this podcast over on YouTube? Well, you'll get to see all of our guests' fantastic photography in full Technicolor over there. So make sure you head over there. Just head over to YouTube, search for Camera Shake Podcast, and you can watch all of our past episodes on there too. So, and if you're already there, be sure to drop a comment, hit the like button, ring the bell, share with your friends. Your engagement does help us reach more people across the globe. So thanks again for listening and watching. And remember, a new episode drops every Thursday. So make sure you mark that in your calendars, diaries, whatever your kids use these days. Until next time, keep shaking things up in the world of photography. See you next Thursday.